All right, let's dive into this. We're going deep into communication today. You guys sent over a bunch of lectures about how we talk, especially when things get kind of tough. So we're going to unpack all of that, why we react the way we do, uh, the downsides of control talk, and the really good stuff, the gems, how dialogue talk can help us have better conversations, more productive, maybe even healthier.
Yeah.
So we'll be looking at some interesting stuff like, did you know there's a link between how we talk and our physical health? We're going to explore that. And get ready to rethink the word why. It might not be as innocent as it sounds.
Yeah, and you know what I find so fascinating is how ingrained these communication patterns are.
Right.
We react in certain ways, often unconsciously. So today, we'll uncover those forces, right, and see if we can find some practical tools to be more mindful and deliberate in our conversations.
I love those moments when you suddenly realize, oh, I've been communicating on autopilot. And the lectures break these patterns down into two main modes, right? Connect talk and control talk.
'Cause-
So connect talk, that's all about building rapport, finding that common ground, like casual, easygoing chats.
Mhm.
But then control talk comes in when we hit those differences, disagreements. It's about persuasion, influence, sometimes even managing the other person's perspective.
Right, and the key here is recognizing that both are natural responses. Control talk isn't inherently bad. I mean, it's expected in certain situations, right?
Mhm.
Like, think about a doctor giving advice or a teacher leading a class. It's when it becomes the default in every tricky conversation that it can really become a problem, potentially damaging our relationships.
Okay, so control talk isn't always the villain.
Not necessarily.
How do we know when it crosses the line?
Well, you can kind of think of it like a spectrum.
Okay.
Like control is about persuasion, putting forth your viewpoint, trying to maybe win them over.
Mhm.
But then when things really escalate, we shift into heavy control. And that's the commands, the accusations, blame, all fueled by that righteous anger or indignation.
Oh, yeah, those heated moments, you're like, I'm right. But the lectures make a strong case that being right can sometimes be a problem. I loved that analogy of the car at the intersection.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
So the driver technically had the right of way, but there's a car running a red light about to T-bone them.
Right, right.
Being right in that moment would be disastrous.
Absolutely.
And conversations can be like that, too. Sometimes being right keeps us from actually solving the problem.
It does. It's like we're focused on winning instead of finding a solution that works for everyone.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of those, kind of you messages, like you're always late or you never listen,
Right.
the lectures gave some really good examples of how those can escalate conflict.
Mm.
Why are those so problematic?
Well, those you messages immediately put the other person on the defensive. It's like pointing the finger, it creates distance, and it just shuts down productive communication. It rarely leads to the understanding we need to actually resolve the issue. And isn't it interesting how these patterns often come from, our upbringing and culture? We learn by watching, especially our parents. And even if our parents were mostly encouraging, I'm sure there were times they resorted to commands or those you messages when we pushed their buttons.
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
We internalize those patterns from a young age. They become our default responses when things get challenging.
It's almost like an unconscious script we act out, even when it's not serving us well.
It is. It is.
We're stuck in a time warp.
Yeah.
Using those same old strategies, even when they're not appropriate or effective anymore. Remember that example of the car salesman, George?
Oh, yeah.
He was so focused on closing the deal, he missed all the cues from his potential client, Rob.
Oh, George. He just kept piling on the pressure, using all those classic tactics like promising a rosy future, appealing to Rob's ego, even bringing up his wife's feelings about the deal.
It felt like he was so fixated on his goal, he totally disregarded Rob's perspective, like trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
It's a trap we often fall into, especially when we really want to persuade or influence. We get so laser focused on our objective that we lose sight of the other person. We don't see what they're communicating.
I thought those doctor-patient interactions from the lectures were really eye-opening, too. Apparently, it's common for doctors to interrupt patients within seconds of them describing their symptoms.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
it is. It's another example of how even well-intentioned control talk can hinder communication. They jump in with questions, directives, driven by the need to manage the appointment, get to a diagnosis quickly, but by not giving the patient space to fully express themselves, they might miss crucial information.
It makes you wonder, what are we sacrificing when we prioritize efficiency over really letting a patient feel heard?
That's a good question.
Speaking of those moments when we feel our face is threatened, remember that Thanksgiving dinner story where someone brings up an embarrassing childhood memory?
Oh, that's a classic example of connect talk, instantly morphing into control talk. When
Yeah.
we feel exposed, attacked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our instinct is to defend ourselves. And we often resort to those light control tactics, like explaining away our actions, maybe subtly undermining the other person's perspective.
Right. And if that doesn't work, we crank up the volume, we move into heavy control, commands, accusations, blame,
Yeah.
even personal attacks.
Yeah. It's almost like those patterns of rightness and blame take over. We forget there's an actual person on the other side of the conversation. We're so convinced that we're right and they're wrong, and we miss the opportunity for a solution that could help both of us.
It becomes less about resolving the issue and more about protecting our ego, clinging to that sense of being right, even if it damages the relationship of the process.
Right.
But that's where this idea of dialogue talk comes in. It's about making a conscious shift from that reactive, control-based approach to a more mindful and collaborative way of communicating.
So instead of being defensive or trying to control, dialogue talk is about choosing to understand. Even if it means letting go of needing to be right, that feels like a real game changer. But how do we actually apply it? In those heated moments, where do we even begin?
Well, it starts with a conscious decision, choosing understanding instead of that need to be right.
Right.
It's about letting go of that urge to defend ourselves and really trying to grasp the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
Not easy, especially when those emotions are running high, but it's where the real magic of communication happens.
It sounds like a real mindset shift, retraining ourselves to pause and listen before we react.
Yeah.
The lectures mention asking the right questions, particularly when things get a bit tense. What kind of questions are we talking about here?
Instead of jumping in with solutions or counter arguments, you could try asking, can you tell me more about that? Or what's important to you in this situation? These open-ended questions really show genuine interest and encourage the other person to elaborate, and that gives you valuable insights.
It's like being a detective gathering all the clues before you jump to conclusions.
Exactly.
It reminds me of that example with the toddler who drank the cat's milk.
Oh, yeah.
The mom asking, "Why did you do that?" just triggered a defensive reaction.
Yeah, that why question often comes across as an accusation. It just shuts down communication.
Right.
Instead, try something like, how did that happen? It encourages explanation without the blame, and that can lead to a more open and honest exchange.
It's amazing how a little shift in the language we use can make such a big difference.
It is.
It's not about letting the toddler off the hook. It's about understanding what actually happened instead of immediately blaming.
Mm.
Now, what about when we need to communicate our needs and our perspective? The lectures talked about assertive dialogue. How is that different from just being aggressive?
Assertive dialogue is finding a balance. You're communicating your needs and feelings clearly, respectfully, but also acknowledging the other person's perspective. It's about being strong, but not overpowering.
So it's not attacking or manipulating, but rather expressing yourself in a way that's honest and considerate. What are some practical ways to do that?
The lecture suggested using I statements. Describe the specific behavior, express your feelings, and explain the impact. So instead of, you're always late, you could say, when you're late for our meetings, I feel frustrated because it disrupts the flow of our work.
That's a great example. It's clear, direct, and it focuses on the impact instead of attacking the person. It feels like a much more constructive way to address the issue.
Exactly. You're shifting from blame to impact.
Yeah.
You explain how the behavior affects you, and that opens the door for a more productive conversation.
Okay, now for those really persistent problems, those issues that keep coming up, the lectures introduce this concept of structured dialogue. Can you unpack that for us?
Think of structured dialogue as a more formal approach to dialogue talk. It's specifically designed for tackling recurring issues that haven't been resolved through those casual conversations.
Gotcha.
It requires a conscious commitment and a bit of preparation beforehand.
So it's like setting up a safe container for a really productive conversation.
Yeah.
What kind of preparation are we talking about here?
Choose a safe space. Set aside enough time. Establish ground rules, things like no interruptions or personal attacks. This really sets the stage for open communication and mutual understanding, even with tough topics.
It sounds like a really powerful way to break through those communication barriers and really get to the heart of the matter. The lectures also touched upon the differences between how men and women often approach communication. Any insights from that section that really resonated with you?
One key takeaway for me was that men and women are often socialized differently, and that leads to distinct communication styles that can cause misunderstandings.
Right.
For instance, women often seek emotional connection and validation in conversations, while men tend to lean towards problem solving.
Oh, that reminds me of that cartoon where the woman's upset about her hair and the man suggests wearing a hat. Classic example of men jumping to solutions, missing the emotional need underneath.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And it highlights the importance of recognizing these different approaches. It's not about one style being better than the other.
Right.
It's about understanding that we might be coming to the conversation with different goals and expectations.
So being aware of those patterns can help us avoid those frustrating miscommunications and really build stronger relationships. The lectures also had some great advice on fighting fair in relationships, which feels incredibly relevant for our listeners.
Absolutely. The key is staying respectful, even in the heat of the moment. It's about focusing on the issue, managing your emotions, finding solutions together, remembering that you're on the same team even when you disagree.
That reminds me of Gottman's research, which found that contempt is one of the biggest predictors of relationship breakdown. Dialogue talk feels like an antidote to contempt, doesn't it? It helps preserve the connection even when things get tough.
Contempt is poison to relationships. It erodes trust and it creates distance. Dialogue talk helps us stay connected and create space for repair and growth.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the workplace. The lectures highlighted how effective communication isn't just about personal relationships. It's vital for a healthy and productive work environment.
Right. The research shows that managers who use dialogue talk create more engaged and productive teams. It's about valuing employees, seeking their input, fostering open communication and respect.
Those survey results from the 106,000 employees were pretty shocking.
Yeah.
Only 26% felt fully engaged with their work, while 19% were actively disengaged.
Wow.
Clearly, there's room for improvement when it comes to communication in the workplace.
Those numbers are a stark reminder that how we communicate has a huge impact on morale and productivity. Creating a workplace where people feel valued, heard, and respected should be a top priority for any leader.
The lectures outlined 7 steps for achieving clear, considerate, and collaborative communication in the workplace, which I thought were very practical.
Yeah.
Can you share a couple of those steps for our listeners?
Sure. One step is to be clear and concise in your communication. Use language that everyone can understand. Another is actively listening to understand the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree. And of course, showing empathy is crucial. Acknowledging the other person's feelings and showing that you care about their well-being.
It sounds like a recipe for a more harmonious and productive work environment. The lectures also highlighted the power of appreciation in the workplace.
Appreciation is more than just saying good job. It's about recognizing employees' contributions, acknowledging their feelings, and creating opportunities for growth and development. This fosters a sense of belonging, which boosts both individual and team success.
That story of Joan, the supervisor, who bravely challenged her boss about the flawed testing procedure was so inspiring.
Oh, yeah.
Joan's ability to stay calm, use I statements, and focus on facts allowed her to communicate her concerns and advocate for a better approach. It's a great example of how assertive dialogue can be used to speak truth to power and actually lead to positive change. It's a reminder that even in a hierarchical system, clear and respectful communication can make a real difference. The lectures also offered some good tips for providing high-quality customer service, which often involves navigating some tricky conversations.
Yeah.
What were some of the key takeaways there?
One key takeaway is the importance of staying calm, actively listening to the customer's concerns, and using assertive dialogue to set boundaries when necessary.
Right. The three-tiered approach for dealing with difficult customers was particularly insightful. It gives employees a clear plan for escalating the situation if a customer becomes abusive or threatening.
Yeah, that tiered approach is a great example of balancing customer service with self-respect and personal safety. It empowers employees to handle those difficult situations effectively while also protecting themselves from harm.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. The nuances of connect talk and control talk, the power of dialogue talk and its applications in relationships, the workplace, and even beyond. As we wrap things up, what are some key takeaways you'd like our listeners to ponder as they continue their communication journey?
It really is.
Well,
It feels like we've got this whole toolkit now, right?
yeah.
All these strategies and insights to be better communicators. But with so much to think about, where can our listeners even start? Like, what's one small thing they can do today to actually put these ideas into practice? What one tiny change could make a difference?
Yeah, what's that one little shift?
I'd say choose just one conversation. It could be with anyone, a family member, a coworker, even a stranger, and really make a conscious effort to truly listen.
Truly listening. Sounds so simple.
Right.
But I bet it's harder than it sounds, especially when we're so used to jumping in with our own thoughts.
It is. It's about putting aside distractions, judgments, and all those automatic responses.
Hmm.
We often listen to reply, but this time, just listen to understand. Hear their words, but also the feelings behind them. Reflect back what you're hearing, acknowledge their feelings, ask clarifying questions.
It's about really making that person feel seen and heard, creating a space for that connection.
Exactly.
And it doesn't require us to completely change how we communicate, just that one shift in one conversation.
That's it. Starting small with the conversations we're already having, just bringing a little more awareness, a little more intention, and a little more heart. And, as we practice, as we become more mindful, we'll see that the positive impact goes way beyond just ourselves.
It's like that ripple effect we talked about. One act of kindness, one moment of empathy, it can spark a whole chain of positive changes. So, to our listeners out there, as you go about your day, choose one conversation, one interaction, and make it a dialogue talk moment. Try those principles of listening, empathy, and respect. See what happens.
You might be surprised by how much can change just from choosing to truly listen. And remember, becoming a better communicator is a journey. It's about learning, practicing, and really committing to that genuine connection in all our interactions. Embrace the challenge, You'll be amazed by the positive transformations you can create in your own life and in the lives of everyone around you.
That's a really beautiful thought to end on. We all have that power, right? To become better communicators, to create those fulfilling relationships, and to contribute to a world that's a little more compassionate and understanding. It all starts with that one choice to listen, to understand, to connect.